Society is hierarchically and incrementally structured if it's structured properly. And by properly, I mean in a non-tyrannical manner that doesn't require compulsion, that isn't an analog of the Tower of Babel. It's an alternative that's modeled symbolically by both Mount Sinai and by the Ark of the Covenant, which is something, if you're more interested in, we'll cover in the Exodus seminar. So imagine that you're nested inside sequence of social organizations, and that the integrity of the state constitutes the proper functioning of that entire sequence of nested interactions. And so there's you and the community that's you that extends across time. And so that unites you with the community right at the base, right at the core of your being. And then there's you and your wife or husband. That's the fundamental social dyad. And that's the bedrock, the foundation stone of society. And it's partly the foundation stone of society because society involves more than one person. And society is the negotiated, productive, generous, peaceful solution to mutual being. And so it's not just a metaphor that marriage is the bedrock of society. It's like, no, it's actually the bedrock of society. And so then you might say, well, how do you construe that relationship if it's optimized? We talked a little bit earlier about the idea of you both being subordinate to the divine word. And so we could say, well, say you have to negotiate with your partner. Well, why? Well, you have to live with them. So what are the possible states of being? Well, one of you can tell the other one what to do, and the other one can submit under force. So that's tyranny or slavery. It can be completely anarchic so that neither of you ever know what the hell's going on or which way's up or which way's down. And so that's the desert, that's utter chaos. So you have tyranny and slavery, you have utter chaos, or you have logos-guided negotiation, dialogue. So we can unpack the nature of the logos. So the first thing is that the logos, the spirit which you embody, is properly oriented towards love and life more abundant. So imagine that you love your partner and maybe they love you back, and maybe you can each love yourselves to some degree as a consequence of that reflection. And so what does love mean? It means something like, if I would like for you to have what was best for you, if I could only conceptualize that and bring it into being, that's what I want. And so when you're negotiating with your partner, you want to put that frame of mind in place. I want the best. I don't know what the best is because I'm ignorant and steeped in sin, but I'm willing to lift up my eyes and to try to at least figure out what it might be. But to the degree that I'm wise enough to understand it, that's what I'm going to aim for. And then I'm going to tell you the truth. Painful as it's going to be, annoying as it's going to be, risking the chance that you'll turn away in contempt and disgust and be appalled, I'm still going to tell you the truth. Truth serves love in that context. Now you're negotiating. It's like, okay, what do you negotiate about? In a household, every single thing that you don't want to be a tyrant about or a slave about or have chaotic. And that means every single thing. Where the scissors should go in the appliance drawer. That needs to be negotiated. How every room is set up. How every room is decorated. So our house, my house with Tammy, is in pretty good order. I've been trying to clean up my room for like 5 years, and I've realized, especially under the pressure of intense social involvement, that you actually can't clean up your room entirely in isolation, because the world keeps intruding like the snake intrudes on a garden. The world keeps intruding, and so just when I get my life cleaned up, I get a bunch of stuff in the mail, or something goes wrong in the house and there's more stuff piled in my room, and I've just never quite got it in perfect order. And so one of the reasons I've suggested to people that they try to put one room in perfect order is because that's a practice of perfection. And you'll find that when you do it, so if you're in a family that's chaotic and dysfunctional, as you try to clean up your room, set it in order by your own standards, right? You want everything to be in order by your standards. So you sit in your room and you look around and you think, what bugs me here? What's out of order? What isn't in its proper place? What do I avoid because I don't want to look at it? I don't like looking in that sock drawer because it's like got decades old socks and it's a mess. I don't even like looking at it. It's like You want to be friends with everything in your room. So then you start to clean it up, and then your family's so chaotic, they come in and cause trouble, and they bug you, and they ask you who the hell you think you are, and what you're doing, and isn't that stupid, and who cares about your bloody room, and why are you obsessing about that? Then there's fights because you're trying to improve yourself, and they're not, so you're casting them in a dim light. And what you find very quickly is that by trying to do something right, one thing right, you touch on everything in your life that's wrong. Anyways, you try to put your room in order, and then you're married, so you have to put the room jointly in order, and then you have to negotiate. And you might say, well, my wife wants this here, and I want that here, and now we have to compromise. And I would say, no, negotiation towards compromise is only necessary when the negotiation is suboptimal. Here's the advantage to having a partner. So imagine you have some notion of what you want and need. And then they have some notion of what they want and need. And it's not the same, because it's not going to be the same. And so then you start talking and you think, well, I can give a little here and take a little here, and you compromise and you both walk away and you kind of got what you wanted, but not quite. And so you sort of begrudgingly go along with it, and it's better than a war, but it's not as good as the following alternative, which would be, why don't you talk about it deeply enough so that you now jointly construct a vision for how that space could be. Maybe it's your utensil drawer, which by the way you use 3 times a day and you will use for the rest of your life, so it's not trivial. And you think, how could we set this up that's better than either of us initially envisioned? So how can we mutually craft a vision together using our different perspectives so that what we're aiming at isn't a compromise, but it's a synthesis of our needs and wants that's preferable to our original vision? And then you think, well, why not aim for that? And you think, well, that's not practical. It's like, that's wrong. This is really practical. So one of the things I do in my business arrangements, to the degree that I'm capable, is I don't sell, I don't push, except when I'm not operating properly. I ask and invite. And what I want is for everybody to walk away from the discussion thrilled. Like really, actually thrilled. Yes, I'd love to do that. That would be great. And so why is that such a good negotiation? It's because, well, you can just leave the other person alone then. It's like if they're thrilled and they're 100% on board and you fleshed out a shared vision, they're just going to run off and work like mad on that. And, you know, unless there's barring idiocy and sin, let's say, but of course that's always going to come along for the ride, they're going to be maximally motivated. And so what you want to do in your household is you want to go into every room, every nook and cranny, and I mean every one. And you want to have a negotiated settlement for how that's going to be set up. And you both want to be thrilled with it. And that's just a matter of putting everything in order, everything in its proper place. Nothing too trivial to attend to. Nothing too trivial to fight over. Now you're going to live in that house. You're going to be in it day after day. And a lot of these mundane things repeat, and they have to be got right. When are we going to eat? What are we going to eat? Who's going to cook? Who's going to serve? Who's going to clean up? Who's going to pack the dishwasher? Who's going to unpack the dishwasher? Who's going to clean the toilet? Who's going to scrub the floor? Who's going to mow the lawn? And you either negotiate those things consciously and in good faith, or you fight about it underground with your hands around each other's neck, stupidly, for 30 years, and nothing gets done right, and you get old. Those are the options. And so you think, well, you know, I don't like conflicts. Like, you don't like thinking, you don't like negotiation, you're not very good at it. The alternative is this tyranny or slavery or chaos. It's like, get good at it. And how do you get good at it? Aim up, be honest, say what you want, and be willing to listen, because you're stupid, and what do you know? And maybe the other person can correct you, so you don't have to run flat out nose first into a brick wall. And so that's why you listen, because, you know, maybe this person that loves you has an idea, and maybe they'll tell you what they want, and maybe if you give it to them, then you'll get what you want, and then you both have what you wanted, and oh my God, wouldn't that be terrible? And so that's a possibility. And so you negotiate all the order, and then the balance between order and chaos in the home. And so Tammy and I collected a lot of art. This is part of beautifying the house, let's say, not just putting it in order. I went online on eBay mostly, and I looked at, I think, 1 million paintings. I looked at like 300 or 400 paintings a day for 6 years. And I bought about 500 paintings. And for those of you who think you can't afford art, it's like art's free, taste is expensive. And so if you develop your taste, you can find art online for nothing. and buy nothing. I bought collections of 40 Impressionist paintings from Russia for like $200, $5 a painting. And so yeah, you can afford that, but you have to have some taste. And so I would go in and look at hundreds of paintings, and then I'd select like 20, and then I'd print them out and put them on the floor, and then Tammy would come in and I'd say, get rid of 15 of these. Which ones have flaws? And she'd point out the flaws, and then we'd end up with a collection of about 5, and then I'd buy them. And then we put art all over the house, like 300 paintings. And some of them were pretty brutal, because I bought a lot of Soviet realist art, and some of that featured Lenin, and you know, he is a very bad guy. And some of it's featured war scenes, and so there was a real harshness, and I was studying propaganda and totalitarianism, and so that was kind of rough. And then we renovated our house and took all the art out, and then we got sick, and so the art didn't make it back. And so then we started to negotiate again about bringing the art in the house, and it was real tense for a while, because Tammy had made the house bright and airy, because it was a dark house, a semi-detached without very many windows. It was hard to make it light. And she didn't really want to have the war and propaganda paintings back. But I really liked some of them. They were very high quality paintings, and I had focused a lot on totalitarianism. And so that was kind of a sticking point for us. And then we decided, I thought, well, maybe those paintings served their purpose. And they are kind of dark. And we have a lot of other paintings, so maybe we could just decorate the house with the other paintings, and we could try that and see how it goes. And so we decided to do that, and then we put up all the paintings. And so we had to make joint decisions that appealed to both of our tastes, and we actually had a really fun time doing it. And so now there's like 150 paintings back up in the house, and it's a very vivacious place, and it's well lit. And so I liked it before we did the last renovation, but it's better now. One of the bones of contention was I was buying these often museum quality paintings. They were made by expert artists, because the Russians kept their traditional art capacity and skill going even during the Soviet era, although it was subverted to propaganda often. But many of these paintings were very high quality, and they're up on the walls, and we had little kids around. And so, well, then the issue is, well, can the little kids touch the paintings, and is now the house such a museum that nobody could have any fun in it? And our jointly negotiated solution to that was, we'll put the paintings up on the wall, and we'll have the kids, and if the paintings get damaged, apart from stupidity on the part of the children, which will stop, if the paintings get damaged, that's life. They're not behind glass. This isn't a sterile environment. It's a welcoming environment. Plus, turns out that oil paintings on canvas are unbelievably tough, and even if you dent the hell out of them, Julian dented one with a basketball and put a pretty decent sized bulge in it, and I found out if you just sprayed the back of the canvas with water, it would shrink and tighten back up, no chips. Oil paintings are tough, and so that was fine. But we had to negotiate that. And see, that was a balance between order and chaos, right? Because the paintings are on the walls, and they're all placed very carefully, because we looked at it a lot. We put every painting in the place we thought it was best, and we went through every room like that multiple times. You get your house in order, but you allow for that interleaving of chaos, because there have to be dogs and cats and children and guests, and they have to be able to disrupt things while they're alive, just like you do. So it can't be too sterile and perfect, because that's a tyranny. And so you set that up, that order and the balance between order and chaos, and then you elevate that to beauty. That's the next stage. And you develop your artistic taste doing that. And that's been very useful for both of us, because Tammy's become a better artist, and so have I, because I've been able to see the world through the eyes of artists. We have a much more keen aesthetic sense, which has helped me in clothing selection, for example. I have a much more deep and well-developed sense of geometric arrangement that's pleasing synthetically, because of studying suprematist and constructivist artists. Plus, the house is real fun, because it's full of all these crazy paintings. And it's a place that invites creativity, and that was good for the kids when they were growing up, because they had these great works of art on the wall, and they just took that as a matter of course. And our original house before the last renovation had 38 different paint colors in it, which was really lovely. And the house is, in some sense, it's a work of art, but it's also a habitable work of art. And so that's really fun, and that's all been a consequence of intense negotiation. And one of the things I've learned about, I've lived in many houses, and I've renovated 3 almost from scratch, with other people's help, obviously. But I've done a lot of the renovation work myself, and so has Tammy, and a lot of the design work, and so we know the house. Any place in your house that you haven't attended to in detail, And that might mean cleaned off with a cloth or brushed or sorted or organized or arrayed. Your bookshelves, your drawers, any part of the house that you haven't paid detailed attention to is not part of the habitable order that is good. It's part of chaos still. And you react to it as if it's unfamiliar and foreign, and that makes you uncomfortable and makes you feel not at home. And so the advantage you gain by pouring your attention into every nook and cranny in your house is that the house becomes familiar. The house turns into a home. And that's all a consequence of dedicated attention. And if you jointly dedicate your attention to that, then it's the house that you both inhabit. And if you do that properly, you produce a better house as a consequence of your dialogue than either of you would have produced in isolation, even if you would have got exactly what you wanted. And so that's a really good deal. And that's a good mantra for negotiations. When our kids were growing up, we used to have weekly meetings. And we always treated the kids like they were agents of responsibility, right from the time they were very, very little. When Julian was like 15 months old, he was bringing table knives over the table to set the table. Because you want to get kids in on the responsibility game as fast as possible, because it helps them understand the utility of maturity, and it helps them develop some real self-respect, which beats the hell out of self-esteem, by the way, because they can see themselves not only as valuable contributors, but as the sort of valuable contributor that becomes more valuable as he or she develops. And that's an invitation to maturity. And since children are going to be adults for most of their life, you want to invite them to be mature. Anyways, we had meetings once a week where we parsed up familial responsibilities. And there were rules for the meetings. The first rule was, come to the meeting. And the second rule was, stay till the meeting's over. Now, if you get upset, you can leave, but you can't go off in a snit, and you have to come back. And you're going to abide by the decisions, and you're not going to say yes to anything that you don't agree to. So there's no, okay, I'll do that, and then you run off and don't do it. It's like, you do not say yes unless you mean it. And you have to accept the deal that's in front of you if you can't think up a better deal. And so you can't just say, well, that's not good enough. It's like, fine, no problem. Come up with something better and we'll entertain it. No, then you can think about it till the next meeting because we can revisit it then. But if you can't come up with a better plan, you're not saying, well, I'm not doing that, and you have to come up with a better plan. It's like, sorry, that's on you. And so, you know, because there's a certain number of things that need to be done in the house. If you negotiate those voluntarily, you can start with a list. Here's the list of things that need to be done in the house. Okay. Then you give that list to everybody and you say, you have to pick, maybe there's 4 of you. You have to pick a quarter of those things. Because there's 4 of us. Or maybe the parents pick up 35% and the kids 15%, depending on their age, whatever. You can go away and you can decide which 25% you're going to take. And then we can all come together and we can see, have we covered the whole 100%? And the answer would be no, about 80%, because there's going to be overlap. Fine, then we'll negotiate out the overlaps. How? We'll trade. And then we'll come to the best solution we can. And then we'll revisit this in a week or a month. Often if we made an agreement, we'd revisit it in a month because a week was too short. And then, you know, we can fix it up and we can see what's missing and we can evaluate each other's performance, and that's how it's going to be. And then that worked fine because then people picked up their responsibility and they knew what it was clearly and they knew what the goal was. And part of the goal was, don't be resentful, irritable, bitter, and useless, because that's annoying for you and everyone else. And obviously you have to contribute, and we can contribute jointly, and that'll just make it better. And that worked really well. The kids were very responsible in that regard, and right from the time they were very, very little. And that negotiation was very good. And here's a hint for negotiations too. You know, often when you're negotiating, especially with your wife or your husband, things from the past pop up in weird ways. The psychoanalysts call those complexes. If you're in a therapeutic relationship with someone, you know, you might decide strategically to undertake a certain task. So let's say you're dealing with someone who's socially anxious and you ask them to just go to the corner store and introduce themselves to the shopkeeper. You say, well, you're going to see that person a lot. You might as well know who they are. Introduce yourself. And maybe if the person is very socially unskilled, you teach them how to shake hands. You match the tempo of the other person, you grip their hand fairly firmly, but about as firmly as they do, or if it's a dead fish, maybe a little more firmly. You look them in the eye, but not in such an intimidating way. You say your name, you ask them their name, you say nice to meet you. You practice that 15 times so the person knows how to do it, and then you launch them off to do it. And then they come back and they say, I didn't go talk to the shopkeeper. And you say to them, well, do you have any idea why not? And you don't say that judgmentally because it's a real question. You say, well, I was remembering this time that my dad got into a fight with a neighbor, and that really bothered me when I was a little kid. And you think, okay, well, I don't know what's going on there, but that was the complex. There's something there about fear of the stranger that's tangled up with a childhood experience. And so then you have to unpack that, and that can be it's like surgery, it can be extremely difficult. You'll find that those things arise in your marital life all the time, that you'll be having a negotiation that appears reasonable, and then something unreasonable will emerge in the middle, and neither of you know what the hell it is. It's like a little demon has come to visit, and the other person becomes unreasonable, or maybe you become unreasonable, and then neither of you know what's going on. When that happens and the negotiation breaks down, one of the things you can do is you can go to separate rooms and you can think, okay, I'm probably doing something stupid here, or I have done something stupid in the past, or I don't understand what's going on. How have I been stupid now or in the past? What could I offer and how could I make this better? It has to be a question. And you'll get a realization if you sit there. And then you can come back together and share those realizations. And it's like, well, I think I was stupid this way, and I seem to have said something to you a week ago that set you on edge, and so we're not negotiating properly. And then maybe she'll say, yeah, and I remembered this thing that happened with my mother when I was like 5. They used to leave me over the weekend, and I felt that I was being abandoned, and so I don't trust people as well as I might. And so when I'm called upon to trust you, then that threatens me. And it's like, my God, you have to sort out the whole past. But you do if you live with someone, and you do with you too. You have to sort out the whole past. And you can do that if you're, you got to pay attention like mad though, and you want peace. Because that's another thing you got to ask yourself is, okay, what do you want? Peace. I don't want to fight with my partner. It's like, wait a second. Do you want peace? Or do you want to not fight with your partner? Because you are not the sort of saint that can have peace. Peace is really, 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 really hard to attain. Like true peace, that's paradisal. That's like high-level goal. That's a light on the hill, man. That's the promised land. You're not going to go from wherever the hell you are to peace in one move. And so you get to peace through negotiation. And there isn't a lot of difference between negotiation and conflict. If negotiation is proper, it's half mercy and it's half justice, because the mercy is, we're going to stay together and we love each other, and I'm going to forgive you your faults like you forgive mine, and I'm going to make allowances for your human frailty, and vice versa. That's the mercy. And then the justice side is, but we're going to hold each other to account, and we're going to aim at a high ideal, the highest we can manage. And then you interleave those in judicious negotiation. And that's the pathway to peace. And the pathway to peace is to untie all the knots in the rope of your life. There's no simple way around that. You have to eradicate everything that's not worthy, including all the things you're bringing forward from your past, some of which you might have, in some sense, inherited from your parents, and the pathologies of their relationship and the atrocity of history, all of that. And you think, well, that's not true. It's like, how many marriages, wash up on the rocks of an embittered feminism? For example, you don't think that history comes a calling or ideology comes a calling in the midst of a relationship? It happens all the time. And so you have to deal with the broader social concerns of the relationships between men and women and throughout history in some real sense. And you have to deal with that in your marriage. You have to figure out how to make peace with your wife, your beneficial adversary. And you have to understand that peace is very, very, very difficult to attain. A lasting and true, productive and generous peace. But you can have that. The other thing you learn about social bonding, there's a good animal literature on this, is that you might be afraid of a conflict because maybe the conflict will shatter the marriage. And then you think, well, how much conflict can we engage in? And the answer is, Depends on how committed you are to reconciliation. Because it isn't how much you fight, it's how well you reconcile. And you might say, well, we don't want to fight in front of the children. It's like, well, no. You don't want to fight counterproductively in front of the children. But one of the best things the children can see, in my estimation, is a pretty heated discussion, followed by a positive resolution, followed by the establishment of peace. Even if it's a consequence of unreasonable behavior on one of the part of one or both partners. The child needs to see that difficult problems can be mutually broached and a solution thereby engendered even when it's accompanied by heat, and needs to see, well, I can be imperfect and foolish and warped and cause trouble and have that brought out into the open and dealt with, and the relationship will remain intact. Well, there's the definition of security. Security isn't zero conflict unless it's true peace. And like I said, good luck with that. Security is knowing that you can hammer on the walls, even in a fit, and you're not left completely alone and abandoned. And I suppose that brings us to some degree to the topic of divorce. It's like divorce is not optimal. We could start with that. I think everyone would agree on that. It's not optimal. Why? Well, because what's optimal is a monogamous, stable, permanent, committed, lifelong relationship, and divorce is not that. So if that's the ideal, and good luck formulating a better ideal, and if you can, hey man, promote it, let's hear it. Divorce is not optimal. Is it inevitable? Is it allowable? Well, it has to be allowable, I suppose, within the confines of human frailty. But, often the problem with getting divorced is, well, you had problems in your marriage. Well, it was the other person. It's like, if you think it was the other person, then you're probably the problem. I say that knowing that now and then people get tangled up with someone who can't be negotiated with. And I suppose the analog to that in broader society would be someone who's criminal or narcissistic or psychopathic. It's like you do encounter people who are beyond the pale in terms of negotiation, and that can be a real catastrophe. But if it's just ordinary frailty and stupidity, the problem with getting divorced is you're going to bring your ordinary frailty and stupidity right to the next relationship, because you haven't dealt with the issues. And the data on that are pretty clear too, because second marriages are statistically more likely to fail than first marriages. This is obvious that you learned. And so you might be shackled to this imbecile and, dragging him or her behind you like a dead weight. It's like, well, first of all, it's not so clear who's the dead weight. And second, what makes you think that you won't do or encounter exactly the same thing the next time? I noticed when I was young that 3 of my relationships ended the same way. And I thought, 3, eh? Those were pretty different women. That was probably me. Because what's the probability that 3 women who were quite different were going to react the same way? That's pretty much 0. It was definitely me. And it was me. And so a huge part of what you ask yourself in a marriage is, was this me? And the answer to that almost always is, well, at least somewhat. And when I'm fighting with Tammy, I want to be convinced, just like everybody else, that this is a time where I'm 100% right and she's wrong, because that would be real convenient and gratifying to that rage impulse devil. And so, but I've learned to go away and think, well, yeah, probably I'm only like 99% perfect, and like 1% of me probably made a mistake of some sort. And so I can scour my conscience and find out what that is. And then usually when I find out what it is, I think, oh yeah, it's probably more like 70% me, not 1%. And then I can go tell her that, and that usually works. And sometimes it's 50% me and 10% me, and who knows, depends on the situation. But generally the right place to look for the devil is in your own heart. And I would say that also applies on the broader social landscape. That's 100% for sure. It's like you have got a lot of things that you could put in order, man. And that's terrifying to really see that how disordered the world is your fault. A lot of it, maybe all of it in some transcendental way. So you have a lot of work to do, man. And you'll never run out of that opportunity, because there's a lot of you that could use improving. And you might think, God, that's daunting. Well, that's like bearing the sins of the world on your shoulders. It's very much like that. Of course it's daunting, but man, you've got something to do. It's a never-ending horizon of opportunity. You could be way better than you are in virtually every possible way. And you could ask yourself, well, how good would things be if you were as good as you could be? And I would say there's no upper limit to that. And so, to the degree that you're not living in paradise, you are insufficient. That's a good way of thinking about it. And you can blame it on history, and you can blame it on nature, and you can blame it on your fellow man. And fair enough, man, I've seen people who have had terrible lives and who were in rough situations. But even those people, some of them decided they were going to take it upon themselves, all of that atrocity and catastrophe and malevolence. They're going to take it upon themselves and do good nonetheless. And they became figures who were virtually saint-like in their day-to-day operations. And so you might think, well, I've been traumatized and hurt and betrayed and malevolent, and so I'm doomed to cynicism and nihilism and despair and envy. It's like, yeah, that's a good story, and it's compelling and it's understandable, but there are people who've been through worse than you who still do good. And so that's also worth thinking about, like, for the rest of your life. And so the negotiation frame, we could run through that again. It's not compromise. You have this other person who's bound to you, that loves you, and vice versa, that you can tell the truth to. And what that means is you have a forum for the development of a vision that would compel both of you upward if you could just exchange enough information to make that possible. And I would say, well, is that true? It's like, well, remember, again, you were in love. What was that like? Is it a delusion or is it the highest truth? It's a glimpse of the highest truth. You could live in that kind of love if you could manage it. And you do that through dialogue. And that's, for better or worse, that's the joint worship of the redemptive word. That's what it is. It's the willingness to, and this gives this a Christian twist in a very interesting way, is that the Passion story, the crucifixion, is the story of the confrontation with the most dire doom. And so you think, well, what's the most dire doom? Well, death. Yeah, that's bad. No, torture, then death. Yeah, that's definitely worse. Betrayal, torture, and death. Yeah, that's worse. Tyranny, betrayal, torture, and death. Nihilism, tyranny, betrayal, torture, and death. Just keep piling it on. And then death and all of that, followed by hell. Okay, that's about as bad as it gets. That's the Passion story. It's like, well, do you have to confront that? Well, yeah, you do in your life. You have to confront all that. You will confront all of that. And you can either do it voluntarily, or you can do it kicking and screaming. And you can do that with your partner and mutually fortifying each other, or you can do it separate and at each other's throats. And those are your options. Because if you think you're going to get through this without betrayal and malevolence and death and torture and hell, then you're naive beyond comprehension. And then you might think, well, if that is fate and destiny, why would I bother? And the answer is possibly that if you confronted it forthrightly and voluntarily and in a spirit of logos and dialogue, that you could transcend it and transform it into something incrementally approaching the paradisal. And the reason that marriage is a sacrament is because that's the fundamental place where you can practice that. And as far as I can tell, that's all just true. That's as solid as anything I've ever discovered. And I can't see my way around it.